And everybody, it is 4:30, so I'll start the meeting. So, welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I would particularly like to welcome those members of the public and press watching the live stream. As with all technology, there's always the possibility of something going wrong with the live stream. If anything should go wrong, I will adjourn the meeting until the issue has been resolved. Brings us on to agenda item number 1, public question time. No, there are no public questions. Agenda item 2 is apologies and substitutions. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Lucius Vellacott and Councillor James Lay. Councillor Lorna Dupre is currently in the meeting of the County Council, so will be late. And Councillor Christine Ambrose Smith is substituting for Councillor Vellacott.
Thank you, Patrick. Agenda item number 3 is declarations of interest. Does any member have any interests to declare for any items on the agenda? No, thank you very much. Agenda item number 4 is the minutes. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of April 2025. Can I have a proposer for the minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Horgan, and from the chair, I will second the minutes if that's okay with everybody. Right, moving on, brings us to agenda item number 5, Chairman's announcements or Chair's announcements. I have one announcement to make today, and that is that today marks the last meeting for our Section 151 officer, Ian Smith. I'm sure all members will join me in wishing Ian a long and happy retirement, as well as a quick recovery from his hip replacement. Ian, thank you for all the work you've done here at ECDC. You and I have worked together for a few years now, and it's always been a pleasure to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That concludes Chair's announcements. It brings us on to agenda item number 6, the internal audit annual report and opinion for 2024-25. And can I ask Rachel Ashley-Cornt to introduce this item, please? Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So as your Chief Internal Auditor, I'm required on an annual basis to provide you with an assurance opinion on the Council's governance, risk and control framework. So that should be primarily based on the work of the internal audit and the outcomes of those assignments and any other sources of assurance I'm able to take into consideration in forming that opinion. So our first report for you today is the annual report and opinion for 2024-25. So Appendix A provides you with a full copy of the report. So I'll just walk members briefly through the key sections of the report, and I'll be happy to take any questions. So the opinion is set out for you in section 2 from page 3 of the appendix, page 15 of the papers. And this sets out the assurance opinion and breaks it down a little bit more into the different elements around financial control, risk management, and internal control as well. So the assurance opinion that I've given is of good assurance. Now, to put that into context for the committee, this is an improved position from previous years, where I've given a moderate assurance opinion. So this reflects an improved outcome on audit assignments and is as per the definitions within the report in section 4.1 of the papers today. So as I've said, the report is then sets out the financial control elements and reflects that 92% of the opinions have been either good or substantial opinions for your financial control review. Financial control reviews. And then overall, we've given a 73% of opinions for all of your audit assignments have been either substantial or good assurance overall. I've also reflected some assurances from other third parties. So on the outsourced revenues and benefits service, where we've received the outcomes of their audits, which are included in a little bit more detail within the report. And the rest of the report then sets out the basis for that opinion and how I've reached the opinion that I'm bringing to you today. And this should then form one of your key sources of assurance for your annual governance statement, which is also on the agenda for you this afternoon. So there is a high-level review of the outcomes of the audit assignments in table 1 on page 17 of the papers, which sets out the percentages of each of those assurance opinions. And then table 3 provides you with a more detailed breakdown of each of the assignments and the outcomes of those. So the majority of these were reported to the committee throughout the year as part of my regular progress reporting, and anything that hadn't been finalised as at the time of the last committee meeting is in your progress report later on the agenda as well. So as I mentioned, we've also included the outcomes of the revenues and benefits audits on page 20 of the papers within the table. So their assurance opinions are slightly different to ours. So I've tried to give some RAG ratings in relation to how they compare to our own assurance opinions. Just to give the committee some assurances that in relation to all 4 of those audits, there were no high risk findings raised in relation to any of the findings. And in each of the cases, there was a general assurance that the systems were operating as expected, but there were some areas for further development. There were no recommendations made on the good substantial audit on enforcement. For the business rates audit, there was 1 new recommendation and 2 overdue recommendations from a previous year. But again, none of those were of high risk. And they reflected things like reviewing credit balances that needed to be addressed within the accounts. Also looking at the delegations around write-offs, which is subject to formalisation within each of the councils. Within the recovery of council tax housing benefit overpayments, again, no high risk findings and no errors or fraud identified. There was 2 recommendations which were made here, which were both new, and all other recommendations had been implemented. And again, they were not high rated organisational risk, but they were things like making sure that there was evidence of write-offs, because in 1 case out of 20, there was not a full audit trail. And again, in relation to suppressed debt, in 1 case out of 20 tested, there was a potential need to remove that account from suppression. So again, generally systems were working well, but some areas for improvement. And finally, on the council tax billing, housing benefit and local council tax reduction scheme, again, no high risk findings. And the recommendations here were around issuing of timely refunds, recording of discounts, and ensuring that we have provisional end dates in place for exemptions and discounts in particular. So here we did have 10 medium recommendations that were made and agreed, and 2 that were outstanding. So those will be subject to ongoing review and monitoring through the partnership, but that's just to give the committee a little bit of insight into each of those. So the other things that I take into consideration in relation to the assurance opinion for the year include the implementation of actions arising from audits. So if we've identified a weakness, if timely actions being taken to address it, then we're able to give a higher level of assurance. So again, the council performed really well in this area, with 96% of audit recommendations implemented within the period, with only 1 action, which was overdue as at the 31st of March 2025. And that's reflected for you in table 4 on page 21 of the papers, page 9 of the appendix. I've also referenced, in terms of other sources of assurance, the council's achievement of the public sector network certification in April 2024, which gives us some assurance over the council's network security and management of vulnerabilities in that area as well. So the rest of the report from section 5 onwards, from page 22, addresses the performance of the internal audit service ourselves during that period. So we have completed 100% of the audits from your audit plan for 2024-25. And we've also included the outcome of satisfaction surveys in table 5 to show the feedback that's received from customers on each of the audits, and just reflected in some of the wider areas where we've added value during the year. One of the key sections as well is in relation to, on page 23 of the papers, page 11 of the appendix, the professional standards and our assessment of compliance against those. So in this year, as I've briefed members previously, under 2024-25, we were working under the public sector internal audit standards, which is what we had our external assessment against, which is in the papers again this evening. From the 1st of April, 2025, we're now working to the global internal audit standards, and we're obviously embedding that within our processes going forward. But for the purposes of this report, I'm able to give you both internal and external assurance over our compliance with the standards for that year, which should give you some comfort over the assurance opinion that I'm giving you today, and taking that forward into your annual governance statement. So I'm happy, Chair, to take any questions on the detail of the report, but that's just a run through of the key sections. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. From the chair, I will propose the recommendation as set out in 2.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Members, comments and questions to Rachel or Ian or anybody else? Stephen.
Thank you for the good and clear report. I have two questions. Shall I answer them both? And then you can answer them both, I guess. The first question is, I'm pleased to see a good assurance outcome and an improved outcome. I think that reflects well on everybody who contributes to that outcome. Could you comment, Rachel, on whether a higher level of assurance is possible, and is it realistic or feasible to attain that highest level of assurance? And I might comment further depending on what you say. And shall I ask my second question now whilst I'm in full flow? ARP and the additional context you've given is very helpful, but nevertheless adequate, reasonable, moderate, considering the sums involved, doesn't feel good enough. And I wonder what the council does to try and get ARP to improve, and what power we have to effect that sort of change. Because frankly, I think we need better than adequate for what are material financial systems. So thank you. Those are my two questions.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So on the first question around the assurance opinion, so this is one of the first times I've given a good assurance, so it certainly is reflective of a good performance for the service throughout the year. It's as I've mentioned, it's the outcomes of the audits combined with the good implementation rate and general assurances, I think, is really positive. As to whether substantial is achievable, I think as an overall assurance opinion, I would think it's probably would be difficult to achieve as an organisation, particularly with the number of risks that as a local government organisation we are facing. I think if we were giving only substantial assurance opinions across the audit plan, we may be concerned we're not looking in the right areas, and we need to have a more risk-based audit approach as well. So I think given the context, given where we're at, I think good is a very good solid place to be. And I would think substantial as an overall assurance opinion would perhaps be unattainable.
Yeah, can I comment on that, which is, I agree, and in my experience, it's practically impossible for a complex organisation to achieve the highest assurance rating. And I think in terms of onward messaging from that committee, I would suggest that onward messaging takes that into account and reflects the fact that under this methodology, this is actually a really good outcome and probably the best that we can get, just from experience.
Thank you, Stephen. From the chair, Rachel, if I go on, as far as the second question is concerned, I'm sure our representative at ARP will be more than happy to go back and reflect your views to ARP. Trust I am not speaking out of turn, Councillor Horgan.
As the recently elected vice chair of the joint council of the Anglia Revenues Partnership, I certainly would be welcome in hearing any suggestions as to how that rating could be improved. I know that in terms of, albeit I've only been on it for about the last 9 months, I've seen ARP win numerous awards in recognition of its performance against other bodies that perform a similar task. And I have great confidence that it's certainly moving in the right direction. We scrutinise very closely its main function, which is it's a bit of a cash collector, if you pardon the pun, for this council and for others. And generally speaking, they perform at least to expectations and very often above. So I'd be interested in our internal auditor's view as to whether she has identified any areas of improvement.
Would you prefer to take that outside the meeting, Rachel?
So through you, Chair, I'm happy to provide further details on the actions that are open in relation to the audits. Obviously, those are the areas where the internal auditors identified an area for improvement. I think it's of a concern that we do have some areas where there are overdue actions still open from previous years. So that's where I perhaps focus. And I know that's something we've discussed. So whether that's something we can challenge back and get some assurances around in particular. So I'd be more than happy to share those actions or further information if you want to follow that up outside of the meeting.
So just saying, welcome Councillor Dupre. We did get your message that you were at a county council meeting and therefore likely to be late. Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please, either via the chair or via a section 151 officer, any suggestions you have, please do forward to me. I welcome the opportunity of raising them on our behalf with ARP through the joint committee. I'll say no more than that on that point. I have only one question, if I may, of my own, and that relates to the item on page 3 of your page 3 of the report, page 15 overall, talking about risk management. It's becoming an interest area for me for reasons I won't bore you with, but we're aware that the risk management group here normally meets on a quarterly basis to review risks and, where appropriate, update the risk register. I just wanted to check, am I right in assuming that after those meetings, whether the risk register has been changed or not, you would reasonably be able to review that to see what has changed, what the implications are, etc. Is that reasonable? Right.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, so I think it's a very relevant point actually in relation to some of the later papers as well about ensuring we have a risk-based approach as an internal audit service. So I do actually attend the risk management groups as an observer. So that gives me a good understanding of the conversations and how the risk scores are being reached. I don't have any contribution to it, so I'm completely independent of the process, but it doesn't mean that I have some insight into the conversations. So that's helpful, and that is able to inform me of any changes we need to make in terms of audit coverage during the year as well. So yes, in summary, I do have that insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, anything further on item 6? Thank you very much. In that case, we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is the draft annual governance statement 324. Can I ask John Hill to introduce this item? Welcome, John.
Thank you, Chairman. For the purposes of any new members to the committee and to remind previous members of the committee who are still serving, this is a 2-stage process. It's probably best to describe the first stage as a process report, in that you will be receiving the first draft, and that will then instigate, say, formal consultation with each and every one of you, plus your substitutes. And members will be aware any comments, amendments or statements will be reported back to the committee with an appropriate response from officers. And then you will get the final opportunity in October to agree or otherwise the final draft for signature by myself and the leader of the council. That's as much as I want to say at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Again, from the chair, I'll propose the recommendation as set out in 2.1 of the report to formally consult, as Chief Executive has said. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Members, any comments or questions to John? John's explained that clearly. John, can I just put, before I ask for other people, can I just point out one that leapt out at me? On page 50, where we're talking about the change to the waste service.
Yeah.
In the rest of the papers, the date is correct as being we're looking to launch in June, but on the penultimate line, it still says April. So
Thank you.
If that could be corrected before it goes out. Stephen.
Very happy to support the process, which I felt worked well last year. I look forward to commenting on in detail during the summer. Just a question on the recruitment to the section 151
Yes.
Post, which is referred to here. Could we have some brief detail on the timescale and process involved?
Yeah. Obviously, I'm not in the position of sharing candidates, but we are going through a process, I believe, because the date has changed, still in August, and we're reporting to the meeting, the council meeting in September, the decision, which needs to be formally endorsed by the full council. I think that's fair to say.
Thank you. So do you envisage some sort of interim cover will be necessary?
Again, minding the confidentiality of it, there are candidates which may not require a interim cover and those that will, dependent on notice period and their current employment.
Members, any further comments, questions on this item? If not, thank you very much. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is the external audit plan for 2024-25. I'd like to welcome David Wrigler from EY, our external auditors, to his first meeting of this committee, together with colleagues. And David, can I ask you to introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So I've taken over from Mark Hodgson. Just a little bit of a background on myself. So I trained with the Audit Commission, moved over to EY nearly 13 years ago. I've worked at most sized councils, London boroughs, county councils, district councils, city councils. So I hope to bring a good level of experience to the audit here, and I look forward to working with you. So agenda item 8 is our external audit plan covering the work we'll do on your 24-25 statement of accounts. I'll just run you through some of the key aspects of the overview section, but more than happy to go into any further detail if that's helpful to the committee. When I reference page numbers, do you want me to use the pack page numbers or our page numbers?
If it's as easy, could you use the pack page numbers?
That's fine. Yep. Okay, so on pages 67 and 68 of the pack, you'll just see an element of context to the current environment regarding public sector financial reporting and auditing. I'm sure Mark has gone through and kept you abreast of the kind of developments over the last few years. Just as a recap, the key things we have in place at the moment is the government introduced statutory backstop dates through to the 27 or 2028 financial year. They carried out an independent review, which kind of mirrored earlier findings from 2019, which essentially said the system was broken and it needed quite a significant overhaul. In terms of the most recent update is the Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill last week that went some way to start to set up the local audit office. And I think that's when we'll start to see some fairly fundamental changes to the process going forward. I think it's just important context that actually a lot of the reasons that led to the huge backlog and the issues across the system are still there, which means that the audits have effectively got to be almost perfect to get completed. So I think just a bit of context there for the committee. Turning to the report itself, so on pages 69 and 70, we just set out the areas where there are heightened risk. So we will do additional procedures. Many of the risks will be familiar to the council from previous plans. So on page 69, you've got the misstatement due to fraud and error, which is a standard item in each plan. An area of focus leading from that is the override of controls in relation to revenue recognition and the ability of the council to post them to capital reserves. So we'll do some additional procedures around that. Sticking on page 69, we've got a risk around group accounting and the consolidation of the council's subsidiaries into that set of accounts. Now, that has been influenced by a change to the auditing standards. A new auditing standard has increased the amount of focus that I, as the group auditor, has to have in terms of the involvement of the audit of the subsidiary companies. When we issued this plan, it was provisional, largely because we hadn't completed some of the risk around the group risk assessments. So there are 2 additional risks associated to group accounting, and I will bring this back in terms of a written form, but just for a verbal update on the latest position. One risk is in relation to revenue recognition, and that's income in relation to the council's companies. If you look at the component auditor for those companies, they have that risk on their plan. That risk is now in the council's group audit plan as well. The other risk is around the valuation of work in progress. Again, this is in relation to the companies. So 2 I'm verbally updating you on, but I will, as I say, bring it back in writing. The other risk on page 69 is the pensions liability. Again, this is one you will have seen. Significant figures involved, significant assumptions used, requires the use of actuarial experts, which just raises the risk in terms of potential misstatement of the figures. On page 70, we then have two risks, so valuation of land and buildings, again, large figures on the council's balance sheet, use of assumptions, estimates and experts, again, raises the risk in terms of the procedures that we carry out. And final risk on page 70 is a new accounting standard that has been issued and is applicable to 24-25 financial statements. That's IFRS 16, so that's the leasing standard. So we've raised that a risk at first year implementation just to assess how the council have implemented that standard. Page 71, we set out the materiality basis, which is similar to what you would have seen in prior years. Page 73, we've got the value for money arrangements with further detail in section 3 in terms of what we've identified, no significant risks to report in terms of additional work around value for money at this point in time. Page 98 sets out the timeline. The key date is the statutory deadline for this set of accounts, which is we need to publish them audited by the 27th of February 2026. The audit is currently planned to start in August, but across all of our audits this year, we are just carrying out some quality checks on the accounts and the supporting working papers before we actually start the audit, largely because there is not capacity or time within the system for us to start and not be able to run an efficient audit. The only other thing I was going to ask is my colleague Anastasia, just to give you a very brief update in terms of what we've done to date in terms of the audit.
Thank you, David. Dear committee members, just want to introduce myself. My name is Anastasia Leftan. I will be second year will be managing the audit. I have 16 years experience in EY, including 5 years experience in local government sector audit. So regarding the status, as of today, we have finished the planning phase, scope and strategy, the audit. This phase involved a thorough assessment of risk areas, determine the scope of the audit, developing the audit strategy, updating understanding of the council. Also, we prepared the significant classes of transactions work and updated our understanding of each class of transactions, such as accounts receivable, accounts payable, cash, and other, including using the data analytics for that. Also, the value for money work has been prepared with no risks of significant weakness identified at the moment. We will update our work on that area during the year-end audit. For the preparation to the year-end audit, we ran the workshop for the finance team, where we have covered the working papers and audit evidence quality requirements, and we will be working together with the finance team to ensure that we have efficient audit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. Members, any questions for external audit? Ian, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. On page 67, you're saying we therefore expect to again issue a disclaimed audit opinion. Is expect the correct statement, or because obviously unless EY put in the necessary resource, it will definitely be a disclaimed audit. So are EY intending to put in enough resource to give us the opportunity to have a certified audit, or are you simply putting enough resource to give us a disclaimed audit?
Yep, so there's been a number of guidance notes issued by the NEO and the SIT for kind of setting out, and essentially if you have a disclaimed audit, the quickest you can get back to a clean audit is 3 to 4 years. So you had a disclaimed audit last year, you will definitely have a disclaimed audit in 4 or 5. That, if we can complete all of our planned procedures, will be historically based. And the audit results report that will come back to this committee later in the year, if you remember the one that Mark brought to you in 23-24, it kind of had an appendix and it set out where you've got your levels of assurance from. This time round, it will have the same appendix, but we're also producing a kind of a direction of travel, if you like. So where we see the clean opinion starting to come back. When I speak to other committees on this, I kind of say, I think you've got to almost focus on that. So we've got this historical gap. That's not going to get filled in 24-25. But what I'll report to you is the work we've done on the in-year transactions. And that's essentially where I think you'll get your assurance from kind of almost ignoring the disclaimer in the statement of accounts in terms of the opinion. It's the assurance you'll get from the in-year transactions and the audit where we've completed.
Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. Just 3 questions, if I may, and apologies for being late. I was held up at the County Council, full council meeting. The first question is on page 69. Well, no, it's not a question, just a comment on page 69 of the pack and welcoming the reference to an identification of group accounting as an issue there. I think that's something my group is very pleased to see. That there is focus on that because it's an important issue and our accounts have doubtless got more complex in recent years. The following page, I've got a question on implementation of IFRS 16 section. In the second paragraph of the details, the second sentence says, where the council is statements, but these will now be recognised on the balance sheet as a right of use asset and lease liability reflecting the obligation to make lease payments. What should that have said is my second question. And my third one is a very minor one indeed on the following page, just for me to understand why group materiality figures are expressed to one more decimal point than council materiality, despite the descriptors being identical.
Thank you. These reports go through various levels of review and often I'll sit here and I'll pick up some typos just as I'm about to present it, but yeah, clearly that is a typo. I mean, what it's saying is that if there's a lease type arrangement and it involves an asset that the council is using, that asset will now be recognised on the balance sheet. So, and this will, the biggest impact is what would previously have been determined operating leases, where the council would have just recognised the in-year revenue expense for that. And that was it. There was a disclosure note, but that was it. Now, that differentiation between operating and finance leases is gone, and any assets that are associated with those leases are recognised on the balance sheet.
Steve.
Sorry, page 71. Group materiality 0.85 million and council materiality 0.8 million, despite the fact that the descriptors of the materiality are identical. And I'm not clear why they're specified to different levels of decimal pointage. It's not meaningful in any way. But we should be able to read the lower figures as being the upper figures if we wish to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you. I have, I think, 4 questions. Firstly, David, welcome. Really good to see you and look forward to working with you. I wasn't aware that Mark has left the audit, and perhaps a brief comment on why there's been a change would be useful. But your credentials speak for themselves, so it's not a comment about that. On page 69, building on Councillor Dupre's point, there's an increased focus on group accounting because of misstatements in the previous audit. And I wondered if Ian could comment on what the finance team is doing to address that so we don't have a repetition of those issues this year. David, in the voiceover, you referred to a pension liability. The draft accounts show a pension asset, and I wondered if that affected your approach at all, it being an asset, not a liability. I got 2 more. Should I carry on, Chair? Or, yeah. Page 87. The materiality calculation is based on gross expenditure on services of 42.9 million. The draft accounts we have, I think, show a different figure of 40.7 million. So I just asked that that be looked at in case it affects the materiality calculation. And finally, on page 98, on the timeline, by now we've already had the interim testing. So I just wondered if we could have some headlines to how that went, really, any sort of show-stopping issues to be aware of at this early stage. But overall, I think this document is is good and clear, set as it is in the context of the ongoing backstop and recovery issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark's rotation is purely rotation purposes. So every few years, partners and even managers have to rotate off of audit just to stop continuity risk playing in. So as simple as that. I work from the Cambridge office. I work very closely with Mark, so he's briefed me on the council. So there's kind of no loss of experience. It's still there. And if I've got any questions on the council, I can get back to Mark on that. So I'll leave second question for Ian to pick up in a second. Third question, IS 19. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the risk. You're right. It is an asset. Maybe I should have said IS 19 valuation rather than liability. So within the council's accounts, the figure on the balance sheet is a net figure made up of a huge liability and a huge asset. Last triennial valuation, most pension funds went to a surplus position, which I'm sure the council are aware of. In terms of accounting, it's not quite as straightforward as just taking that asset, reducing it by the liability and putting it into your accounts. The accounting standards require the calculation of a cap to work out how much of that asset you can actually recognise in your account. So it has added an additional complication in terms of what the council officer has to pull together in the accounts, and again, what we need to in terms of auditing. Is that okay on that point? Yep. Was it the materiality? So yeah, on that page, so that is based on the draft, oh, no, sorry, the final 23-24 gross revenue expenditure. When we start the audit for the execution phase, we will update that materiality based on the 24-25 draft account. So that will be updated, and it will stay updated all the way through to the conclusion of the audit. And then the final point on the timeline. So there were some delays in us being able to finish our planning procedures. That meant the interim was going to hit the phase when councillor officers were putting together the final set of draft accounts for yourselves. So it was agreed that we wouldn't press ahead with the interim because the council officers wouldn't have the time or capacity to kind of service those interim requests.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to the group accounts, I think it's fair to say there has been quite a bit of confusion between officers at the council and EY about exactly how you combine the group account figures together. And I think that confusion has led to potentially the council showing the group account figures in a wrong format in the 23-24 accounts. But assuming we've now got a full understanding between the two parties, then I have confidence the 24-25 accounts will be fine.
Thank you. I'm happy with all those responses, and just to empathise from experience, the group accounting is tricky. Yeah, I sympathise with that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you. Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair, and likewise, welcome David and Anastasia as well. For my sins, I'm going through the pension regulator trustee pension training at the moment, and I'm not quite saying that I'm anywhere your level about the difference between assets, liabilities, accounting, PPF, and all the different ways of working out whether there's a surplus or deficit. But so therefore I would welcome an understanding, because here on page 79 it says when you've assessed the pension that's totaled a net asset of 2.891 million, but I wasn't sure whether from that I could determine whether it was in surplus or deficit, or because from my understanding, and I'm only just doing the training right now, so tell me if I'm off track, obviously that has to be put on the company's books, and I presume that's the same for the local authority as well. So is it plus, minus, surplus, deficit, please? That's the first question.
Yep. I'm not I don't think I would profess to being a complete expert in pensions. A lot of these figures are derived by actuaries, but obviously we need to do work in order to assess the accuracy of the actuary. That is a net assets, that is a surplus position. So there will be a significant liability figure, but an even bigger asset figure, which then has resulted. As I say, this changed on the March 22 triennial valuation. I think prior to that, you'd have seen large liability figures on your balance sheet. Now we've got a smaller, you'd say 2.8 doesn't seem that big, but if you saw the liability figure and the asset figure that we have to audit separately, very, very large figures.
Yeah, and you may or may not be aware that the Pension Schemes Bill 2025 is going through Parliament. It's had its second reading on the 7th of July. And it looks like the government has got its eye on pension surplus, particularly in local government pension schemes. So that's going to be an area that's going to be of particular interest going forward, but it's not in force yet. So it's a watching brief, I guess, on that point. My other questions are moving on to page 87 and where it's repeated again on 88 at the bottom of the page. We request that the Audit Committee confirm its understanding of an agreement to these materiality and reporting levels. What format or form do you require confirmation in? The verbal, written, just a nod?
Could I take, because I was actually going to raise that as if nobody else had raised it. Clearly, we reflected it. We will answer that question amongst ourselves, and it will be reflected in the minutes of this meeting. So since you raised it, we might as well cover it off now. Are we comfortable with the materiality and reporting levels? Because I am. I'm not seeing anybody else. That's satisfying.
Yeah, I was just going to give the committee a little bit more assurance that those percentage levels are kind of almost not dictated, but are kind of set by auditing standards. There's a degree of benchmarking across audit suppliers. So by no means are you kind of an outlier in relation to that. It's kind of a standard and it's an industry set percentages. In all the committees I've been to, I've not had a committee yet that has changed that percentage, but clearly we run that through you just in case there are different things or different aspects that you think we should take into account.
Members, anything further? Not. We will thank you very much. And we will move on to agenda item 9, which is the draft statement of accounts. I'm going to ask Ian Smith to introduce this item for his last time.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Attached are the draft accounts for the year 24-25. The finance team will be working with audit colleagues over the coming months to review these, with the intention of providing a final copy for committee to be approved in either late 2025 or early 2026. As with the AGS, if members have any comments on these, please can these be sent to myself and I will review and action before the final draft is published. Can I, at this point, also thank Stephen, who has offered to be a critical friend during this period. Members are asked to note the draft accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. From the chair, I will propose that we note the draft accounts. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Members, comments or questions to Ian or audit colleagues? Councillor Dupre.
Just two very minor ones. On page 190 of the pack, there seems to be an error at the bottom of the page. I think it's that the amount has been in those two lines, council tax charge per band D property. I think the amount has been changed, but the year to which it refers has not. Just need to correct that. And I did quite like the idea of on page 148 of items being marked by asterisks. I assume that that is an asterisk rather than a cartoon ghoul.
Stephen.
Thank you. I think the process is clear. David indicated that there'd been some slippage on the interim testing phase of the audit. Does that have any knock-on implications for the timescale set out here, Ian?
Your question.
It just means we'll do the full year's transaction testing. So in the interim, there would have been probably income and expenditure testing that we would have tested to the 6 or 7 month stage and then topped it up at year end. Now we just do it in one hit at the year end.
Thank you. I suppose the real question was, will we hit the 27th of February figure?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
27th of February 2026 is the backstop date. I'm trying to gauge whether the delays you've already reported have knock-on risks to achieving that date next February.
I will sign by that backstop date. I think the key question will be how much of our planned procedures have been able to complete by that date. At the moment, we've got resources in there to complete all planned procedures. So that kind of links back to those quality checks of the accounts, high-level quality checks and quality checks of the working papers that we'll do before we start the audit, as I need the audit to work smoothly. So as soon as we hit errors, as soon as we hit issues or lack of supporting working papers, then I'm already on the back foot in terms of, well, how many of these planned procedures can I actually complete before the backstop date. But we, as you say, we've run a workshop with the finance team to kind of clarify that. We've designed some extra enablement that we're going to share with the finance team this year, which clearly sets out, when you give us evidence to support XYZ transactions, it has to hit this criteria. So we're doing everything we can to try and make it as smooth as possible. Appreciating that is a big ask on the finance team as well. I mean, these aren't a small set of accounts. We audit every figure within that set of accounts. There's a lot of transactions that we will sample test. So there's a lot of time and capacity required on the finance team as well, but we're doing everything we can in order to make that audit run as smoothly as possible so that we can complete planned procedures. But I will sign for that backstop date because I have to.
Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, I'm looking here at page 14 of your report, page 130 of the pack, and the final bullet point at the bottom of the page, where it says finance is only required to be raised to cover discretionary benefits when the pensions are actually paid. Could you expand? I'm particularly interested in what might be classified as discretionary benefits, because I know what I think discretionary benefits are, but I'd like to know what, from the council's point of view, what they are.
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure what, I mean, clearly in relation to pensions, the pension is a contributory scheme and funds and balances are held by the pensions within the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund. I'm not 100% sure what they note means over and above that, but I'm happy to take that away.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, from my point of view, it could, and again, going by my training, I mean, it could be that a widow of a pensioner, that gets paid to them. It could be, as in my case, of somebody who is quite old and has pre-97 benefits, which only get increased. But am I right in thinking that the pensions, the local government pension scheme is effectively a defined benefits pension scheme? Yeah, so as opposed to defined contribution. So, okay. But if you could just get an answer to that, I'd be grateful. If I may continue, Chair, I'm on page 44 of the report, page 160 of the pack. I'm returning to an area that you and I have talked about before, Ian, and the long-term debtors there. And I think when we last spoke, I seem to remember I left with the impression that the the loan figures would be going down, but it would appear that over the last 12 months, they'll have gone up from 279,000 to 344, plus they're at 0% interest. And correct me if I'm wrong, they were to do with sort of home improvement loans, I believe that we said. So have we issued a new scheme in that 12-month period of a 0% interest loan for home improvements? Because if we have, I'd like to be able to shout about it and tell people what wonderful people we are. That's probably the reason for asking.
Again, I think I need to take that away and get back to you. Thank you.
No problem. Yep, I'm quite happy to wait before I shout from the rooftops good news. And just a general question, lastly on page 49, you report 165 of the pack. The general question that is a local council, a local government authority allowed to take a pension holiday when a scheme is in surplus, or do you have to make contributions every year? And I appreciate that, you know, often it might be that as an actuary or a scheme manager or somebody financial has to make a decision and a call, you know, how much is contributed, but can you actually, are you allowed to take a pension holiday, pension contributions holiday?
Clearly, the actuary determines how much is in the pension fund and therefore what the contribution needs to be.
Yes.
If the actuary said, presumably, if there was no contributions required, then that, you know, could be done. I can let the committee know that the following the most recent actuarial review, the contribution the council will be making into the pension fund from 26-27 will be reduced compared to what it's paying in this year as a percentage.
Thank you. That's good news. That's all of my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Members, if there's nothing further, we will note that and move on to agenda item number 10, Internal Audit Progress Report. Again, can I ask Rachel Ashley-Corn to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. So the next report is the latest progress update for the committee on the internal audit activity and the outcome of any finalised reports since the last meeting. So the 5 reports that have been finalised since the last meeting that are included today are all from the 24-25 plan. So were summarised for you in the annual report earlier on in the agenda. But I have provided you with a copy of the 25-26 internal audit plan from page 212 of the papers today, which shows the position of each of those audits from the current financial year. So just to reassure the committee, we have actually since finalised the first report from the audit plan for this year, which was on the disaster recovery audit. So that's ready and waiting to come to you at the next meeting. And we would hopefully have a few other further assignments completed at that point as well. We have either completed or have underway all of the Q1 audits that were scheduled. And we also made an early start on the Q2 audit of information requests. So just to give you some comfort that we're on track with the audit plan delivery for this year. So for the outcome of the audits from the 24-25 plan that were finalised since the last meeting, I'll just run briefly through those, which are in section 2 of the report from 206 of the papers, page 2 of the appendix. So the first related to the accounts payable function, which is essentially where we're paying invoices or making payments to our suppliers. So here we want to see a good separation of duties. We want to see key controls being consistently applied over the approval of payments and all of the supporting controls to ensure that we have the robust process. So we're satisfied from the review of the processes and from sample testing over the separation of duties that were in place for payment of invoices. We tested a range of invoices of 25 in total, and we're happy with compliance with expected controls. We did also test 5 credit notes within the system, and for those we did identify some gaps in the controls. Sorry, those were also fine in terms of the credit notes. Thinking about accounts receivable. So those 5 credit notes were also operating in accordance with the expected controls. So where we did identify some areas for improvement was around amendment to supplier details. So whilst the new supplier process was operating well, And we had evidence and an audit trail for each of those cases. Where there were some amendments to the supplier data, we wanted to see a robust audit trail over the checks that had been performed and any amendments that were made. So one exception related to a change to email address, so it wasn't a change to bank account details. So it was a lower risk amendment, but can be the first stage in a potential fraud. So we didn't want to make sure we have a robust process on that. We also identified one area, one case where bank account details were changed and there hadn't been a note made around the checks that had been performed and how those were verified. So again, just further strengthening the processes there. So on the basis of that, we've given a substantial assurance opinion on the control environment and a good assurance opinion for the compliance with the expected controls with a low organisational risk. For the next audit was around accounts receivable. So this is around the raising of invoices to customers and how we're recovering those in a timely manner. So here again, we've performed sample testing on 25 invoices, which confirmed good compliance with the expected controls and timely raising of debts. This is where we did identify an issue around credit notes. And in the 5 cases that we looked at, there were 2 that were missing evidence of approvals. We've obviously highlighted that within the audit for an action. We also looked at the council suspense accounts and reassured that was subject to regular review and clearance, which supports the debt recovery process. And we also looked at the sundry debtor reconciliations to give us some assurance over the accuracy of the records. Whilst we were satisfied that process was taking place, we did need some further evidence around independent review and timely completion of those reconciliations, so have made some recommendations on that basis. And overall, we've given a good level of assurance for both the design of the control environment and the compliance with those controls in practice with a low organisational impact. So the next related to procurement compliance. So here we're looking at compliance with the council's own contract procedure rules and also the relevant legislation. So we usually do this audit in 2 parts. So the first part is to look at spend reports and compare that to the council's contract register to ensure that all of those areas have been suitably included and referenced within the register. So the sample testing here, I did identify a couple of areas where there was high levels of spend and no entry on the contract register. And when we looked into those cases in particular, we identified that these had been contracts were awarded, but a contract documentation had not been developed in a timely manner and hence not included on the contracts register. This was something we did pick up last year, so there had been a recommendation around this. And again, we have agreed an action to review the processes within the legal service to ensure these are being raised and completed in a timely manner. The rest of the testing looked at sample testing on compliance with contracts that had been awarded. So from a sample of 7, 5 of the contracts had been awarded in accordance with the exemption element of the contract procedure rules. So they had been considered as exempt from an element of contract procedure rules. In all of those cases that had been justified and given appropriate authorisation in line with the policy. We also had one case that was fully compliant that had been awarded and we were able to see evidence of the procurement process. And one further example where we did lack evidence of the approval to conduct the procurement at the outset, where we have identified that as a potential area of non-compliance. So overall, we've given a level of moderate assurance for the control environment and for the compliance with those controls in practice with a medium organisational risk, and also mindful of the implications of the Procurement Act coming in to make sure that we're ready for that as well. So the next related to housing allocations and homelessness. So this was one of our risk-based audits and something that we revisit on a regular basis. This is an audit where the service had recently come in-house, so it was a timely opportunity to review the processes. And we were satisfied that the policies that were in place were clear and supporting a robust process. The officer leading on it had been working in this area for a while and had come back in-house with the service, and was in the point of rolling out training to other team members to support resilience of the service and continuity. We did identify that there was a lack of documented procedures, which is often the case when we have an experienced officer who just knows what they're doing. Obviously, that would support more resilience across the service if we have documented procedures and enable cover when we have any changes in personnel. We also identified around the arrangements for appeals and reviews that there was a lack of record and logging of those to ensure that we were tracking their progress and ensuring a timely resolution. So have raised a recommendation around this, and also aligning the financial thresholds within the policy to that in practice to ensure that we're fully transparent around that process. Overall, again, we also looked at the homelessness processes and the compliance with the strategy, which again was clear and had been subject to regular review. And sample testing of homelessness referrals confirmed applications were being handled in line with the strategy, and we were able to see evidence of the decisions that had been made and how those could be verified. So overall, based on some of the areas we've identified for further improvement, we've given a moderate assurance opinion for the control environment, a good level of assurance for compliance, and a low organisational impact. And the last audit was in relation to the planning service review. So this was a proactive piece of work to support a review of the ways of working within the planning service to improve efficiencies and reduce reliance in particular on the extensions of time. So we wanted to do a review to make sure that the process was fit for purpose and that it was delivering upon the expected objectives and outcomes. So we looked at the governance, implementation and monitoring arrangements for this particular project. And we were able to see some clear reporting lines, some clear oversight, and progress was being well captured within the reports we were able to see throughout the project life cycle. In terms of outcomes, we were also able to see a decrease in the usage of extensions of time, which was one of the objectives of the project, which gives us some assurance around the outcomes and the effectiveness of the work that's taken place. We have made some recommendations around having a mechanism to collect customer feedback so that we get some assurance over the quality management of the service. And that's something that will be taken forward. We've also then been able to give a good assurance around how phase 2 is progressing, and that seems to be on track in terms of where we would expect it to be at this point. So based on those findings, again, we've given a good level of assurance for the control environment and for the compliance, and a low organisational impact overall. So also within the report is an update for the committee on the implementation of actions arising from audit assignments. So since the last committee meeting, we've had 10 actions that have been completed, and we currently have one which is overdue. And this is summarised for you in the table on page 214 of the pack, page 10 of the appendix in table 2. Which shows there is only one, as I say, overdue audit recommendations, which is less than 3 months overdue and is of a medium priority. So I'm happy to take questions, Chair, on any of the content of the report, and I'll report back to the committee on progress again at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, from the chair, I'll propose recommendation as set out in section 2.1. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Members, comments, questions to Rachel? Councillor Horgan.
Yes, at the end, mentioned that there were, I think, 10 actions that we've identified apart from the officers. As with sort of a couple of areas, procurement and housing allocations of homelessness, we're trying to find is moderate. I was just wondering if any of those actions related to the need or identify the need to change or improve the policy or procedures that perhaps we as the audit committee need to refer to the relevant policy committee so that they can then discuss an appropriate policy or procedural change that will make an improvement in those areas.
Rachel.
Through you, Chair. So some of the actions may not be yet due for implementation, so they wouldn't yet feature on that table if the timeframe's not yet arisen. I can confirm, however, that the one action which is overdue actually relates to the procurement compliance audit, and that does relate to the action to review the processes within the legal service to ensure the timely drawing up of contracts. So that has just become overdue, and that's obviously something that we will be continuing to focus on. So just to give you that context in terms of that table.
Just if I may finish. So there's nothing that at this moment in time we need to refer to Finance and Assets Committee, for example, in terms of this policy needs to be reviewed or changed.
Through you, Chair, no, I'm not aware of any outstanding actions around policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Dupre.
I think that's answered my questions.
Thank you very much. Stephen.
A couple of brief comments, a couple of quick questions. Thank you. It's another good and clear report. On page 207, second paragraph down, there's a reference to supplier bank account changes, and the committee is probably aware that some councils and other organisations have suffered material financial losses by not being watertight on this, and noting that it's a good and green opinion overall, I would want to emphasise the importance of addressing the issues been raised here. Second comment on 208, and given that it's the one that is the overdue one, I think it's incredibly important that the sort of lack of contracts issue is addressed. And if Maggie was here, I would want to be saying that to her directly, that I think that's incredibly important. So perhaps the onward messaging from the committee can reflect that. I think my only other question goes back to the audit plan for the coming year. When the draft plan came to this committee last time, I think Councillor Dupre asked a question about or a request that property transactions be covered in this plan, and you were going to take that away and consider that. And I wondered what the outcome of that conversation was.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, just to reiterate on the supplier details, absolutely support that, and that's hence one of the key priorities, one of the key risks that we always look at as part of our accounts payables audit. So I fully support that. In terms of the additional request, that is something that we've been handling outside of the committee meeting, and I'll be feeding back to the Chair as well as Councillor Dupre. So I think as a basis of discussions, as it's not something that we need assurance on in the current financial year, it's not something that would be appropriate for audit coverage at this point, but it's something that I'm trying to support through ad hoc support and assistance from the audit plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, if there's nothing further, we move on to agenda item number 11, which is the internal audit external quality assessment for 2025. Again, over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my last report today. So under the internal audit standards, both the public sector internal audit standards that we're working to in 2024-25 and the new global internal audit standards, which we are now under in 25-26. There is a requirement for us to have an annual self-assessment against the standards, but also an external quality assessment at least every 5 years, which should be undertaken by a professional independent individual who's suitably qualified to undertake the assessment. And that should then be shared with this committee. So in terms of the outcomes and any actions arising from that assessment as well, and any areas of non-compliance that we need to address. So since we set up the Northants Council's internal audit service in-house, I have been performing annual self-assessments. And I wanted to get to the point where we had sufficient evidence to inform an external assessment. So I've been doing those assessments every year and building that evidence base up ready. So I thought we were at a point where it'd be useful to have that external assessment. Also with the new global internal audit standards coming into force, I asked the assessor to do a gap analysis as well, so that we could then inform our work to align with the new standards. So we tried to use it to support both processes. So that assessment is now complete, and I have referenced it within my earlier papers, but I wanted to ensure that this committee receives a full copy of that report for full transparency, and that you also have some insight into the background of the assessor, so you have some reassurance around the process. So within the covering report, I've just provided a little bit of detail around the nature of the assessment, the assessor, and the outcome. And then at the first appendix from page 221 of the papers, you have a full copy of the assessment, which is quite a lengthy document. So I appreciate there's quite a lot of detail there, but I wanted to ensure you had a full copy. And I've also then produced some action plans relating to the areas for further development, which I've provided in Appendix 2 and Appendix 3. The first around the recommendations made in the report, and the second around further areas for enhancement to align with the global internal audit standards as well. So I don't intend to go through the report in detail, but essentially the key outcome of the assessment is that the Council's internal audit service is delivering to a standard that generally conforms with the internal audit standards. Now, I know that may not sound overwhelming, but that is the highest rating that we can get as one part of these assessments. So I just wanted to put that into context. So the assessor has drawn out areas of good practice, which is really pleasing to see and very positive for myself and the team to take on board. And it's also helpfully provided us with some areas where we can further develop to align with the new standards and build on the feedback that's been received. So I won't go through all of those areas, but essentially the summary provided on page 226 of the pack shows that of the 3 areas assessed, we were either established or excelling in all 3 areas. There is also some benchmarking within the report on pages 244 and 245 of the pack, where in the first table, in fact, both tables, we are the dark orange colour on the chart. And that does show again that we have performed higher than all of the other local government organisations that have been assessed under this programme as an average, and also in the other sectors in the majority of areas in the on page 244, with the exception of housing that's just beaten us slightly on resources. So there's, as I say, areas for improvement within the pack, which I've then drawn out for you in the two appendices. And I've given just some insight into my response, because I do think in a number of areas we're already doing quite a bit of the recommendation, and it's just further honing that a little bit more. The only other thing that I would mention just in going through this today is that some of the areas that have been highlighted, because we do work with 5 local authorities, some of the recommendations are more applicable to certain audit clients than others. So some are more, for example, more developed in terms of their risk maturity than others. So we've been better able to rely on their risk management framework in some councils than in others. So not all of these will directly apply to how we apply your service at East Cambridgeshire. But I've tried to give you a flavour for each of those as to how we are taking them forward. And where they were quick wins, where they were simply changes to templates, those have been completed, and a number of them are being taken forward currently as a review of our audit manual as well, which is an internal document. So I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair, or to go through any of the sections, but I don't intend to go into more detail as it given quite a lengthy report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Again, from the chair, I will propose the recommendations set out in 2.1. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ambrose-Smith. Members, questions, comments? Councillor Horgan, please.
Yes, I studied this quite closely because obviously the measure of generally conforms could almost be construed by a layperson, not our layperson, I hasten to add. Damned by faint praise is the phrase that comes to mind. But clearly it's not the case. It actually is, generally speaking, quite a glowing report, and I would like to be the first to congratulate our Chief Internal Auditor and her team for attaining, on I think the first attempt now, such a high rating. I'm not going to tempt fate and say there's only one way from the top, but well done.
Members, anything further? Stephen.
I'd like to align myself with the comments of Councillor Horgan. Knowing the language used on these occasions, this is a glowing tribute, and I think reflects well on everybody who's contributed to that outcome. So well done. Rachel, what is the one issue or improvements that you feel needs to be made? What's top of your list in terms of doing even better than what is set out here?
Through you, Chair. I think it's now building on what we've already built, and I think it's how we can take things further. So one of the things that's really focused on in the new internal audit standards is around even more risk-based work. So whilst we are setting an internal audit plan for the year, and that's all risk-based, and we're having the consultation on that, I think we need to have more active review throughout the year. So I want to have more engagement with management throughout the year to ensure we're continuing to be on the pulse of any changes in the risk profile. So each of the councils that I work with, I will be having more client liaison throughout the year to ensure we're aware of anything that's coming up, anything that's changing, be a bit more reactive, look at a little bit more opportunity for things like real-time assurances as well, and making better use of the technology that we have. So I have since developed our quality assurance and improvement plan. That's very much focused in 4 areas, 2 of which are around developing our resources, 1 for staffing and 1 for tools that we use, such as systems. And that's looking to further build on where we are at this point. So those are really the areas that I'd like to focus on.
Thank you, Rachel. Well done. Again, from the chair, I would just like to echo those congratulations that have already been made. And for the benefit of yourself and committee members, confirm that I was interviewed by the external assessors, so I do know that the external assessor was asking people for their opinions. Right, if there's nothing further, thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item 12, Corporate Risk Management Monitoring Report. Ian, can I ask you to introduce this report, please?
Hi, members are asked to note the revised risk register. As detailed in Appendix 1, 2 risk scores have changed since the last meeting, and the reasons for the changes are as explained as I say, in Appendix 1. Please note that the colour code is missing from the final column on page 278. This will be corrected for the next report. As always, if members have any thoughts on any of the risks, if they let me have comment either this evening or on email, I will ensure that they're picked up at the next meeting of the Corporate Risk Group. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Can I have a proposer and seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Horgan.
I'd like to propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan. I'm happy to second from the chair. Members, comments and questions to officers. Councillor Horgan.
Yes, and I think this may be a matter of timing. I'm looking at page 265, and where the list of additions, deletions, changes to the risk register are itemised on page 265. It does sort of just overlap the page to 266, but I'm referring back to the minutes of our last meeting in April, where it was our layperson suggested about the addition of the local government reform, which is actually in the risk register. It's there, so that's great. There was also talk about removing the health and well-being strategy from the risk register. And I believe those changes have been made to the risk register. And I say maybe just down to a matter of timing, but clearly in Appendix 1 on 265, all of the changes since our April meeting are not listed because obviously those two, one addition and one deletion, aren't listed as changes to the risk register. So it would be useful to make sure that going forward that it's not just what's changed since the last time the risk register was reviewed, but what's changed since the audit committee has seen them. And that way it's a full list of both additions and deletions. It's just a request going forward, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan. I'm sure Ian has noted that.
Yeah, I've noted that. Thank you.
Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. Page 265, welcoming the increase in inherent risk on C4 on data protection, which I've raised before in this meeting. Page 276, C4 again. I would have thought the colour on the score, the first score would be red, as it's a 16. And I don't understand why it's an amber as a 4x4. So I think that might need to be amended. And my other question is on C7 climate change. Why is the risk, the impact risk, only 3 in each case? Sorry?
Risk we on, sorry?
C7.
C7, page 278.
I mean, I think the issue with any climate change risk is you have to clearly we can't impact the climate of the world. So therefore you have to have some sort of rationale for the impact on the local environment as opposed to the world environment. And I think that's how we come to the score of the impact of how we as an East Cambs Council will be impacted and how we can do our best for our residents as opposed to how we can save the world.
Okay, thanks. And I'm appreciative that C7 isn't about saving the world. It's about enabling the council to meet the council's target for reduction of its emissions rather than Cambridge's, East Cambridge's emissions as a whole. So I'm not unaware of that. I think the bigger problem I have with this is that there isn't an explanation of how the risks are how they are scored. And I'm wondering whether that's something that we could look at. I've seen other risk reports where, for example, there are certain amounts of materiality set, whereby a financial risk may be scored a certain amount if it's over a certain number of £1,000,000 or probably £100,000 here. And I'm not, I would query whether an impact of 3 is sufficient, but I don't know how the council has got to the point where it can decide whether it's a 3 or a 4 or a 1 or whatever.
Okay. So from that, shall I take that one from the chair? Clearly, we are going to have, as we're all aware, this is Ian's swan song, final meeting before his retirement, and long and happy, hopefully, as I said earlier on. So clearly, we're going to have changes in the risk management group since Ian has been chairing it. So I suggest we speak to the new people moving forward, if you see what I mean. And we'll take that forward from here rather than asking Ian to comment on something that he's not going to have any influence on because he won't be here.
No, fair enough, Chair. I just didn't want that to be lost because I think it's quite an important point.
Yeah.
But also to point out there is a risk management policy and a risk management framework which has come to committee, doesn't come to committee every year, but comes to committee every sort of couple of years for approval. And in the risk management framework document, it does have this sort of more specific narrative about what impact scores and likelihood scores, how they are influenced in a more, objective way.
Thank you, Ian. Stephen.
Thank you. Ian, noting that you're chair of the risk management group and have introduced the report today, I'm not clear why the paper has come to us authored by Rachel, and could we have just some insight as to where ownership of this document is? And if it is Rachel, have you had some input to this document? So just a general question about ownership. And I have 3 questions on the register itself. So could you deal with that general point first, and then I'll go on to the detail.
I think that was an error in the cover report. It should have been in Ian's name as it usually is. So I just have to maintain my independence from the risk management process.
Okay, on 265, the increase in inherent risk of data protection compliance. I'm wondering, Rachel, is that an example of what you were saying earlier, that in year management has identified an increased risk, and would that dynamically therefore affect the internal audit plan for the year? Perhaps you can comment on that, please. Do you want to do that, and then I'll go on to my other questions?
Take that now. Yeah, through. So yes, so this is the sort of thing that would potentially influence a change in the audit plan. From a GDPR perspective, we do actually do information governance audits on a regular basis anyway. We usually have some information governance audits, and we usually have a cyclical approach to our coverage. So at this point, it didn't instigate any changes to this year's audit plan, given the coverage we had from the previous year. And I believe we're about to start an audit which is actually focusing more on information requests this year as part of that cyclical coverage, but we will have that as a rolling area of assurance. So had it been something we hadn't already got on the audit plan, yes, that would have been something that may have sparked a change in coverage.
Just to expand on that particular point as well, Stephen, because at our October meeting, we will get our annual information governance report.
Thank you. A2 on page 267 is about the trading companies and the risk of poor performance one of the effects could be repayment of the loan. Could we please have a briefing note on how well is the company performing to gauge whether poor performance is a clear and present danger or not? And how robust is the debenture agreement which provides security on the loan? So I'd welcome some more flesh on those bones, not necessarily here and now, but perhaps a briefing note or similar. Please. A7 on page 271 is about the waste collection service. The owner of this risk is down as Director of Finance. I'm just seeking confirmation that that is right. If it is right, what are we doing around handover in the coming months? And then in the actions column on the right-hand side, the second paragraph talks about continuing discussions to secure funding for food waste. The very next paragraph says that procurement is underway for food waste. And I just want to check that the reality is that we do actually have funding in place for something that we're procuring. And my final question is on B1, which is 272. Noting it's a sort of low residual risk, there's a significant underspend in 24-25. And underspend usually means we haven't achieved things that we set out to do. And I'm wondering what consequent risks and issues arise from that, and could they be reflected in the risk register, please? Thank you.
Ian, comments on any of those?
On A7, the first one, the owner, must be a typo, it should be the Director of Operations. In relation to the funding, we have received capital funding from government for the additional vehicles we need for the new waste service. We haven't yet received any confirmation of any revenue funding. That's the difference in there. In relation to on B1, the underspend of 2.8 million, the vast majority of that related to, well, obviously there was lots of ups and downs in that, but the two big figures were around £1 million of additional income in relation to business rates than we was forecasting, and also there was £750,000 additional interest receipts than we were forecasting. So a lot of that is additional income, which obviously didn't have any impact on the services we were providing.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So going back to food waste, if there's no revenue funding, what risk is there that we use the capital funding to procure the vehicles and then can't operate them because there's no revenue funding?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're talking about government revenue funding here. The expectation is that there's still a belief that government will provide some funding, but clearly if that's not the case, then it'll have to be funded from council's own funding sources, council tax and the like. But in building the budget was approved for 25-26. Additional costs have already been built into the 26-27 budget for this.
Councillor Horgan?
And yeah, it's, are we looking for an opinion maybe from our Section 151 officer and or our Chief Internal Auditor? On page 280, risk D8, and this is difficulties with staff recruitment, absence, etc., etc. We heard from our Chief Executive earlier about the fluidity, shall we say, of our Section 151 officers' replacement. Is everybody happy that replacing a senior officer in the capacity of a Section 151 officer is covered adequately by this risk as written here? Or is there any level of officer changing, being replaced that would warrant an entry in its own right?
Who wants first go at that? Ian?
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, clearly we haven't reflected it up and down to now, but as I said in my introduction, I'm happy to take the challenge you just give us to the risk management group and form an opinion on that.
Rachel, any view?
Would that meet with our chief internal officer, auditors, agreement that that would be sufficient?
Through you, Chair. I think potentially it's a different risk to the risk that we're looking at here, which is around general retention and recruitment of staff. I think when you have a key role within the organisation, I think that's more likely to impact on other risks. And I think it's more that you need to reflect on the overall risk environment and what are the specific risks coming out of not having somebody in that role or potential changeover. So I do think it's a very valid point, and it's something that should be reflected on as to the impact on the risk register.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, if there's nothing further on this one, we move on to item 15, which is the forward agenda plan. And we have the plan in front of us. Any comments or queries? Stephen?
I'm afraid on the 17th of March, it's my 25th wedding anniversary, so I won't be able to be here. But perhaps if I can have an opportunity to input separately, that would be appreciated.
I think we're going to need to look at February and March because of the sign off backstop date, aren't we? So we'll take that up outside the meeting. I know we don't like changing dates, but I think we're going to need to look at that, particularly because of signing off the accounts. That's not going to fit in with the meeting on the 2nd of February.
And Chair, I'm going to have the same problem with 21st of October as I had today, because that is also another full county council meeting. So I'm going to be having to rush from Auchenbury here, but it may not go on as long, I don't know.
Right, okay. We'll work it out. Councillor Horgan?
No problem with dates, I'm pleased to say, Chair. I was just ask an opinion of everybody whether we think that in light of the change in the senior officer of the section 151 position, whether our next review of the risk management, which is not due until February next year, whether it made sense to bring that forward to October or whether everyone's happy to leave it till February. I'll throw it open for the comment.
I think we need to, I can always change things nearer the date of the meeting. Let's see where we get to, particularly after Ian has referred back to the risk management group about this additional risk or changed risk, as Rachel said. Councillor Dupre.
Chair, I think also that the 2nd of February is a Monday. I'm assuming it's Tuesday the 3rd. That's my diary, that's my calendar.
Stephen?
Yeah, having had a moment to think about what Councillor Horgan said, that could make sense as part of a wider assurance around continuity of the section 151 officers' responsibilities. Because there may be interim arrangements, we don't know, but some assurance about continuity with ownership of the risk management group being part of that. And perhaps by exception, we can be advised of any changes in the risk themselves.
Any views? Yeah.
I mean, clearly I won't be here, but I wouldn't have any issues with the risk register coming to the next meeting if that was to do with committee.
Let's do it then.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing and I'm wondering whether you could confirm for the record what we're actually deciding to do about these dates, because it's all a bit hushed.
So I'm going to have to take it up outside the meeting because I need to check with
Right,
other people.
okay,
And not least when we get a section 151 officer in place.
Okay,
And obviously there's little point in us trying to change a date here if external audit can't do it, for example. We'll have to take it up outside the meeting and give a choice. Sorry, if there's nothing further, shall we declare the meeting closed?